Hey everyone, Cole here, and today I'm going to be talking about 36 questions. It's the 36 questions of a lifetime. So, 36 Questions is a musical podcast about Jace and Natalie, Judith, an estranged husband and wife desperately trying to save their marriage, using 36 questions designed by scientists to make strangers fall in love. The experimental generation of interpersonal closeness. The podcast itself was written, directed, and composed by Ellen Winter and Chris Littler. It is a podcast about love and lies and overcoming the trauma we experienced as children and definitely the trauma we experience as adults. It's beautiful and thought-provoking and heartbreaking, which is why I'm going to be breaking it down act by act and talk about it. In our very first in-depth look. As a warning, I will be discussing this show in depth, so there are going to be spoilers. There are going to be a lot of spoilers. If you haven't listened to this podcast, maybe go do that first and then come back and come stream about it with me, okay? Cool. Alright, let's get started with Act 1. Act 1 is all about establishing characters, their personalities, and their individual traumas. From the peaceful sounds of the waterfall to the terror of driving down a small, deserted dirt road in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, we start with this amazing sound design and lead into a defining song for Judith, played by Jessie Shelton. Hear Me Out, while I wouldn't consider it a character-defining song, it establishes Shelton as a perfect, fantastic performer. With a sultry mix of blues and jazz and pop, she nails both soprano and alto ranges. It's so good. Jace's opening song, performed by Jonathan Groff, is more what I would call character-defining. He is a wreck since Natalie, Judith, was brought into light, and is using the house as a way to fix his life without really addressing the root of the issue. He's determined and very set in his ways, but still incredibly kind. He lets her in off the porch from being eaten by mosquitoes into the chaos that is already his life. We move on to the song Natalie Cook, which is a perfect pop funeral dirge. It's also a bit of a very manipulative way for Judith to connect Jace back to her. There is something to the ritual of setting some old shit on fire. Not only can Natalie be set aside for the truth, Judith can use it as a way to connect Jace to her. She tells him that the creation of Natalie was a little bit more collaborative than you're remembering. I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, but a lot of the times manipulative folks will try to find ways to shift the blame. It's not my fault I lied, it's our fault we needed to lie. Even though Judith is sorry for hurting Jace, or at least she's sorry he found out, she doesn't really see her lies as a bad thing. She even admits it in the last act. I don't know how I could be so wrong if what I did let me have you. She's so good at lying, she doesn't even realize that what she's doing is wrong. It just seems natural to her. And unfortunately, that manipulative behavior works to an extent. We start off the song Judith Ford with an off-mic scream from Jace. I love Jace's and Judith's screams. I think they mean so much with saying so little. It's beautiful, honestly. It marks the beginning of something terrifying and chaotic, but also demonstrates the frustrating type of love he still has for his wife, his estranged wife. Jace still loves her, so he still goes along with her, and knows that A, she's making him do that, and B, oh my god, she's making him do that. Partially, I think it's because he wants to know the truth, partially because she's good at making him do things, and because his first instinct is to protect her and to be good for her. It's also probably because she looks very good in a wet t-shirt. For the record is kind of used to summarize how both parties are feeling at the end of Act 1, and the beginning of their descent into the questions. Jace is nervous and floundering and a little bit horny, while Judith is nervous but headstrong and determined and also maybe a little bit horny. Act 2, I think, is my favorite of the three. This is where sound design really shines, especially with the beach scene. Playing with distances, shouting over wind and rain, all while keeping the actors' lines clear and understandable. There's also so many small interactions kept in that I absolutely love. Judith and Jace react to each other and the world around them in ways that aren't necessarily in the script, but it just gives it that extra little dose of realism about how this couple moves and functions around each other. There's also a small detail I want to put out that's just, it's perfect. Right before our word, the blinker in Jace's truck turns into the beat for the song. You can hear it underneath their words leading up to the actual musical lead-in. It's so subtle, but it's a perfect detail to tie the music into the scene. Okay, I'm actually getting a little bit ahead of myself. We're going to take a step back to the beginning of Act 2. We open with We Both, which is Judith's attempt to get Jace to see the similarity she had with her persona Natalie, and to make him forget the things she's lied about. She shifts blame away from herself, away from Judith, and Jace is able to see that he really did fall in love with an idea of Judith, the Judith she wanted him to see. Natalie is still Judith, but Natalie is the perfect Judith, and it makes sense that Jace would fall in love with the perfect idea of a girl. It's kind of Gone Girl, it's not really Gone Girl, but it is kind of Gone Girl. The song is Judith's attempt to conflate the two women and to completely avoid the blame for her lives. Natalie is the one who lied to you. Natalie's gone now, we don't have to do it. And Jace doesn't fall for it this time. He understands that, yes, they are the same person, but that doesn't absolve Judith of the lies she told. Then comes one of the most raw songs in the show, Our Word. Jace has had enough of her lies, and when he presses her, she finally does tell him about her life, about her shitty life, about how her parents fucked her up and enabled her and encouraged her to make bad decisions. It is a song that always manages to make me cry, and there are a few lines that I think are really important that I want to highlight when it comes to who Judith is as a person. She's describing her final thoughts and about how her parents perceive her and what they would say when she's gone. And the parents would say, "You mean the girl we raised as if our own? We loved her so much she felt like our child, but eventually we had to send her home." Even Judith herself does not believe her parents would take responsibility for her. They can't even claim them as their own child, and the fact that they would immediately lie, shift the blame about their own child, really drives home just how shitty her home life may have been. Honestly, it gives me real big, adoption kid vibes that may just be me projecting onto it, but a lot of the fears adopted and foster children have is that if they mess up at least just once, just one time, their parents are going to be like, "Oh, sorry, you aren't my kid anymore, get the fuck out." And it's terrifying. And so you lie more. You make up awards to please your mom and make sure your dad never finds out about the shitty stuff you've been doing. And it's rough. It is very rough. It is a very intense fear you can have about the fact that your own family can stop loving you just like that, or can at least tell people that they don't love you in the way that they should with a regular kid. Not a regular kid, with their own biological offspring. Oftentimes, people living in toxic situations don't really see those red flags until it's a big, explosive blow up. Sometimes it's the truth forcefully coming out. Sometimes it's worse. Sometimes it's nearly drowning in a bathtub after going on a drug bender because you know it's the only way you can feel things anymore. What you gonna do? Sometimes the only way to see what's right in front of you is to have someone slap you across the face with it. From there, we move on to the beach and a better version. The only way you can start healing is by realizing that you need to. And even then, it's so easy to revert back into those base instincts. Judith found Jace and saw a way to be something more than what she was, so she felt she had to build a new persona. She had to lie her way into being happy. More than a fake name, but a fake life. And not just Natalie's life, it's Jace's too. How heartbreaking it must be to be so blissfully happy and unaware, only for you to be ripped from that perfect dream, and for Judith to come chasing after Jace, pressuring him to get wrapped up in the 36 questions again, encouraging him to drink. At every step she mentions alcohol, or tried to get him wound up or distracted with circular logic and other slightly manipulative tactics. And so they get tangled up in each other. And it's so hard to break from bad habits or escape from toxic people, especially when you still love that person and you're still in that situation. And Judith never really gave Jace the space he needed to overcome the trauma of her lying for 2 years straight. Which is why question 16 about truth and dependability and question 19 about change drags them back to reality. It'd be so easy to run off and find a hotel room and get back together again and ignore all the red flags, but Jace needed to be strong and not fall back into bad habits. He can't just brush his concerns out of the way to protect Judith from her own pain. He needs a way to heal, and to make sure that he hasn't spent the last 2 years of his life being gaslit by some stranger. And so he leaves her. Again. And with that painful goodbye, we get Judith's off-screen mic. It's pained and frantic and marks the beginning of the end. It's where Judith finally realizes that no, this isn't all going to smooth over, and it's not going to smooth over because of the shit she did. And with Jace leaving again, it feels desperate. It's a desperate cry for him to come back, so she knows that all of this shit she's done hasn't been for nothing. And honestly, the end of Act 2 is about where I lose all my sympathy for Jace. I'm gonna explain in Act 3. So, I'm gonna be upfront. Act 3 is not my favorite. A lot of my reasons have to do with my own personal opinions about pacing and redemption, but I'll talk more about that later. So, Jace. Jace drives away and leaves her stranded at a motel in the middle of nowhere. We don't know if she has a charger, we don't know if she has a wallet, we don't know what she has, but I guarantee you it's not much. And he didn't even seem like he was planning on coming back to pick her up. Up until that point, I had felt sorry for Jace. He had some sort of deniability and all this toxicity. First time was understandable. You've just been violently awakened from a beautiful 2-year-long lie. Of course you're going to flee from the stranger in your own home. But the fact that he drove away not once, not twice, but 3 times, that's an issue. But he still leaves, and this time it's for good. And that's fine. Sometimes you need to get away from situations like Natalie, and sometimes you need to get away from extremely frustrating situations like Judith, and sometimes you need to go pick up your 2 very right, very concerned mothers from the airport because of Natalie and Judith. And so we and Judith are left standing there for the 3rd and final time as Jace drives away. Those questions 23 through 35, those really deep questions are answered with such a desperate honesty that isn't really made for one-sided conversation. Judith has nothing left for herself, except for the truth, her own pain, and the record. And since she doesn't want to focus on the latter, she kind of has to focus on the former. And with every answer, it becomes more and more apparent just how much she's twisted her life into these complicated knots that even she can't unravel them. Still, even now, she has a hard time realizing just how wrong she was, as I mentioned before. I don't know how I could be so wrong if what I did let me have you. And I get that. As someone who often deals with mania and hyperfixations, it's so easy to get wrapped up in the one thing you love. You hold on to something so hard that letting go of it will literally break you and the thing you're holding on to. It clouds your judgment, and even looking back, it's hard to see what got you so wrapped up in the first place, or even who you were before you found it. Oftentimes, that something will break. Either your grasp on it or the fragile little thing in your hands. And though those manic rose-colored glasses when you're finally forced to release your vice-like grip, it's tough to notice all the red cracks from your grasp. So, with answer 36, Judith finally realizes what she needs to do. She needs to let go, and she needs to decide to be better. On her own. Hi, cat. Like I said before, the only way you can begin to heal is by choosing to start healing. No one can hand you the magical answer to becoming a better person. It takes actual work, and what she was doing before ain't it. So she leaves, placing the record in Jace's mailbox. We hear her get in the car and drive away, and after a few minutes of gratified silence, it turns off. And if the podcast ended there, I would have died a happy man. Actually, that's not true. I'm still a fickle bitch who will never be happy with my own choices or the choices of others, and that's probably why y'all are here. Instead, we move on to what is my least favorite portion of the act, and let me tell you why. I feel as though we lose all momentum after this point. Again, this isn't an issue with the overall writing, direction, production of the podcast. It's still an amazing story, still amazing sound design and music and just everything. But we spend an hour and a half listening to Judith, grow as a person. She learns the error of her ways, or at least that she needs to actually put in the effort, and those 2-ish hours we had her, she really grew. Which is why it is incredibly frustrating that we have to hear Jace do the exact same thing, growing over a 10-year span in the course of a 5-minute song. But it's still describing what Jace needed. I mean, maybe he didn't need 10 years to do it, but that entire event, from Natalie's past coming to light to Judith's future driving away, took place over the course of about 3 days. That hurricane that was Judith made it impossible for Jace to take a step back and look at everything objectively, his actions and hers. All he knew during that 3-day period was that he had to stick to his guns. Having the record to look back on gave him the autonomy to look back and see that, yeah, he was being a bit of a coward throughout a whole lot of it. He led Judith along, kissed her despite the fact that he wasn't going to take her back, left her 3 times. God, what I wouldn't give for the ability to listen back on high-stress situations so I could finally figure out if I'm acting rationally or like a fucking crazy person. In the very beginning of the podcast, we open with a scene. We hear Natalie recording various bits of her life with Jace. Jace asks Judith, then Natalie, if she'll ever listen back, and she replies, "I guess when I miss it." So, once Jace's second marriage falls apart after being given a taste of his own indignant argument style, a la Lisa Coolman, he realizes that he does in fact miss it, miss Judith, and decides that he owes her answers. And we get what I believe is one of the weakest songs in the show, Attachments. Jace decides how he wants to wrap up this love affair, hoping to gain some sort of closure by shedding and uploading his attachments. The song is weirdly detached from the rest of the musical, which I think, now that I'm saying it out loud, may be done on purpose. It's a song about moving forward using the digital age, which means it's technological, futuristic, a new wave genre that makes sense for the song, but it doesn't really connect with the other songs in a way that flows well. From there, we see Jace as a father, and like Judith predicted, he seems to be a pretty good one. While he's generally pretty honest, he's gotten a little bit more open to little white lies to help with the general struggles of adult life. Also, Jace, bud, if you don't know the answer to your question, Google it. Or, make your kid look it up. We have the internet age. If he doesn't know what an echo is, show him these steps to learn what an echo is. Sorry. That's the one thing. That's the only thing. This is where we meet Judith. Future Judith. She's quiet now, more reserved. She's not the whirlwind we saw her as in the first 2 acts. She only speaks 1 or 2 words while Jace struggles through the questions she deserves to hear. He ends it the same way she did. How do I let you go? These once 2 young lovers tied up so much in each other's lives that even now they aren't fully untangled. But time goes on even after this musical draws to a close. We don't really know how these 2, 3, ended their meeting in the Applebee's or even remain in contact with each other after they leave. I doubt the writers would tell us anyways. It just goes to show, I guess, that you'll never really know the truth. So, final thoughts. I adore 36 Questions. I think it's a heartbreaking, thought-provoking, and masterpiece of a musical. There are advertisements, but none of them really distract from the podcast, and honestly, I'm fine with a few ads in exchange for 3 fully composed acts of a musical. I wish the last act was a little bit more cohesive with the rest of the musical, and I wish Jace as a character had some more musical pieces that tied together, like with Judith's major song, some sort of homage or reprise from the wreck he was in the beginning. It's also not super diverse. Jace has 2 gay mothers and a gay brother mentioned in passing, but that's not representation. It is a shame, but I'm not really sure I've got the time to go into the politics of musical theater as well as race representation within musical theater. All in all, 36 Questions is a wonderful podcast. I wish I had the time to fully explore everything I wanted to, but I kind of have to move on. I might come back to it and explore some wider themes, but also, who am I kidding? I know who I am. So now, if you want to go and listen to this, or if you want to check out all the merch, transcripts, and whatnot, you can go check out their website at 2upproductions.com/36 questions /podcast. Just go to 2upproductions.com. They have a bunch of behind-the-scene photos. You can buy the sheet music. It's a pretty well laid out website. You can also go purchase all of their songs over on Bandcamp with links in the website, which I'll list below. As for now, that's all I've got, so I will talk to y'all later. See ya.